All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on keeping your product data fresh. I'm Danny Hermes. I'm with Developer Relations on the Commerce team here at Google. We work on spreading the word about some of our APIs and providing help and feedback, as well as doing things like this webinar. With me today are Ali Afshar, Amanda Surya, and Jasmine Khan, and they'll be on the chat to help you out with any questions you have. Please use that for any questions. There's an option in here to raise your hand, but don't raise your hand, just ask the question and they'll field them as well as they can. So, almost promptly, let's get started. So, today we're hoping to answer some pretty important questions about the Content API. First, what is it? Second, what is our data freshness policy and how does it apply to the API? Why is the API right for you? So we're going to compare and contrast the API and data feeds. And then also implementation. How can you use the API? So throughout, if you have any questions about any of the slides, just put them in the chat and hopefully we'll get an acceptable answer. So, to start us off, what is the Content API for shopping? Well, before we can talk about that, we need to talk about product search. So, items end up in Google Product Search by first being uploaded to the Google Merchant Center. And your product data is stored there in the Merchant Center. And from there, it goes out to Google Product Search on the desktop. It goes to Google Shopper on mobile, and to several other channels such as the Google Affiliate Network and Google Commerce Search. So, for example, let's say you have 3 digital cameras that you're looking to sell, and you upload them to the Google Merchant Center, and then someone goes to Google and searches for digital cameras. So here they are, highlighted in blue, the 3 cameras that you uploaded. So, like I said, in order for something to surface on Google Product Search, it needs to be uploaded to the Google Merchant Center, and there are primarily 2 ways to do that. Google Product Feeds, and what we're here to talk about today, the Content API for shopping. So, what is the Content API for shopping? The question I promised I would answer. So, it's an API based on HTTP, REST, and GData. So, what is that? So, you have a request with all your product data, and you either get, post, put, or delete it. Those are 4 verbs for a REST API. You send it off to our resource that lives at googleapis.com, and we give a response, which is XML. So a little bit about an API. An API is a way to programmatically interact with something such as Google servers or Google Merchant Center in this case, but it's just a way for 2 programs to talk to one another, right? So in contrast to feeds, a data feed is just a file that contains all the information about your products. It's very similar to the request that's getting sent with the Content API, except it's just a flat text file or XML file. In these files, you have attributes and entities lining out what your particular product data is, and these files, these text files or XML files, are uploaded directly to the Merchant Center. So, the Content API for shopping allows your developers to programmatically upload that data to all the Google shopping sites. It allows you to manage sub-accounts in the case that you have a marketplace and you're managing multiple sellers or multiple sub-stores. And it also allows you to set up data feeds. So if you want to mix and match with the Content API and using data feeds, you can manage those feeds via the API. Once you do have your data uploaded, you can get performance and configure more things through the Google Merchant Center dashboard. This dashboard includes data about the feeds you're currently using, the products you've currently uploaded, the data quality, and other performance statistics. Additionally, using the API, you can track clicks. So with a request to this link here in the slide, I'm not going to go through what the whole thing is, but essentially you're specifying a start date and an end date and a particular item, and you'll get back click tracking in that date range. And that is an extra perk that we have included in the API. So next, the Freshness Policy. So when somebody comes to Google search and they look for a product, If the product's listed for $102, like you see here, the user expects to be able to buy the item for $102. If your base price is different from the total price, the user expects to know the difference, and they want to know what they're going to end up paying, right? So for Google product search, there are three people we're worried about. Number one, we're worried about the user. We want them to have the best experience possible. We want them to be able to find what they're looking for, and we want them to be able to get accurate information about those products. Number two, we're worried about retailers, merchants. We're worried about the people selling the goods because we want them to also have a good experience in servicing their goods through Google product search. And number three is us. You know, we just want to be able to keep all parties happy. So with that in mind, the Google data freshness policy says when a user comes, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to read the whole thing here. If you want to read the policy, there's a short link at the bottom of this slide, goo.gl/C5P8X. And, you know, it outlines what we say pertaining to data freshness. But, you know, just keep in mind, we're worried about the user first, then you guys, then us. So how does this apply to the Content API? So one particular example is if you have often changing prices and quantities, you'd like to be able to update your items in Google Shopping to reflect those changes. If you're using feeds, you can only go so often a certain day. You can only update so many times in a given day, and that sort of limits how often you can update your prices and quantities. If you're using the Content API for shopping, you can do this the second the prices change, and the changes will go through. Additionally, if you have a massive inventory of items, then day-to-day maintenance and uploading of the same massive feed every day can kind of be cumbersome. So instead, one huge upload of your inventory and then small updates through the API may be the way to go. So why is the Content API right for you? Certainly that last slide gave an idea. So here's a 10,000-foot view of the difference. As I said, product data feeds are good for small, static product inventories, small and not changing very often. And of course, since it's only text or comma-separated value files, there's not a whole lot of effort to implement it. The Content API for shopping, on the other hand, is good for large, rapidly changing inventories, but it does require some development effort to use. So one of the great things about the Content API is it's real time. It's very fast for inserting new products. You know, it's on the order of seconds when you're putting in a new product, and you get a response immediately back from Google whether or not the product went in or did not. And similarly, if you're updating price and quantity of the items, there is no extra processing. So after an item gets uploaded to the Merchant Center, there's some processing to make sure we do have that quality before we surface it to our users, right? If you've already uploaded an item and you just want to update a price or quantity, then it's instantly updated. It goes in what we call the express pipeline, and that's a great part of the Content API, that express pipeline for price and quantity changes. In addition, the Content API is automated. So here your feedback from the API are in the exact same format as the requests you sent. They're on an item-by-item level. So every single item that you're trying to insert or update or delete, you're getting a response for that exact item. And as I said before, the responses are immediate. So the second you make the request, you're getting a response back from Google letting you know if the thing you did, if the update you attempted was successful or not. This is in contrast to feeds, where feedback is in email and it's mostly just a summary rather than an item-by-item similarly formatted response. So comparing and contrasting implementation. Like I said, with product feeds, it's pretty simple. Comma-separated value files, text files, or even XML files if you want, but you don't really need a developer for it, especially on a smaller scale. And the Content API does require, at least at a bare minimum, working knowledge of XML. And it does require you to have some development skill as well. And of course, as we update the specification and change certain things about the API to improve the experience for you and to improve the data that we're able to surface to our users of product search, some maintenance will be required to what you're sending. So with that in mind, there are some great extra features that the Content API has that feeds just don't have. The first one, as I mentioned before, you can manage sub-accounts in the case that you have sellers underneath you or complete stores that you're managing. You can also manage data feeds in the case that you want to upload your entire inventory with one data feed and then use the Content API to make small changes. You can manage that particular data feed through the Content API. And another great thing, you can take requests to put new items in, to update existing items, to delete some items, all in one big batch request. And I'll talk more about that in the implementation section. So, how can you use it? How does implementation actually work? So, here's some XML. It's a request containing the information about your item that's going to get sent to Google. So see here we have a title. We have some stuff above that, which is just some fluff that's required to get it through. There's content about your item, price, condition, all these attributes that are important when a user is searching for the item. After you have that, well, actually, before we talk about that, let's talk about XML for a little bit. So XML is a markup language. It's very similar to HTML. It's structured language. It's intended to carry data that a machine can understand. So, that last slide was a little hairy, a little hard to look at, and that's because it's designed for a machine to understand it, not really for a human to see it displayed as is. So here's an example piece of XML. We're just defining a note. We're saying it's to me from Ali. Ali is giving the subject as XML, and the body, XML is the cat's meow. So it's really just some structured data that a computer can understand. So after we have that structured data for a particular item, we post it. A post is one of those 4 verbs for the API, and you're posting to a particular link, and you're also posting authenticated, so you need an authorization token, which we describe in the documentation. And once it gets sent out to Google, we're going to give you a response on success. So a couple things. At the top, there's an HTTP code, which is 201, which means success. And then also notice at the bottom, there's a location for the particular item that you inserted. That's important. Just take note of that. So that location is a unique URL for the product that you've inserted. So in this URL, there's a root, content.googleapis.com/content/version1. There's your ID. There's a path and a projection, which are, again, some other fluff for the API. And then there's something very important at the end, a product ID. And that product ID is unique to the particular product that you've just inserted. And going forward, after you have inserted that product into your inventory, you can use that link to go back and update and delete that product with that link. So with that 201 response, when you're getting the location, there's also a response. Like I said before, your responses from Google are in the exact same format as the requests. So here's an example response. It has much of the same, the title, the content, an ID, but it also has things like published and edited, and these are things from Google as to when you uploaded it and when you last edited the item and when you sent it out to us, when it expires. By default, it's 30 days. So before you actually get into the nitty-gritty of implementing this, we have actually created an interactive online demo, which is, if you just Google search for Content API for shopping, you can find this. The demo actually allows you to do all the operations. So it allows you to insert new items, to update existing items, to delete items, to manage sub-accounts, to do everything you can do through the API within an easy-to-use online interface. And when you're making these requests, it'll give you back the response you would have gotten, both the HTTP status response and the content of that response. The exact same content you would get through the API. So once you get past that and you decide you want to implement, we have 4 open source client libraries written in .NET, Java, Python, and PHP. These libraries abstract away some of the difficulties, like that ID link, where There are certain parts that are not necessarily easy to remember and certainly not completely necessary to the implementation. They're abstracted away, and these client libraries are a great way to make requests and to authenticate yourself and to do all the things you can do through the API using languages your developers are already familiar with. There's a link at the bottom of this slide if you want to learn more about these client libraries. Note, I myself and some of the other developers like Ali in this call have contributed strongly to these libraries, and we continue to contribute, and they're supported in large part by many Google engineers, but they are open source, so you can always see the source code, you can always see updates, and if you want, you can even submit some updates. I have looked at the guest list here, and I actually see some people who have submitted bug fixes for some of these libraries, if that gives anybody an idea. So, as I said before, one of the great extra features of the Content API is that you can send batch requests. So notice this image on the side, you're bundling up products and operations in one post request. That's the great thing. You can put multiple products and multiple operations into a single request. So if you want to, at the same time, delete some items and update other items, you can do it. If you want to, at the same time, insert a new item while changing the price on another, you can do it with a batch operation. Now, batch operations are limited. Each request can be at most 1 megabyte, but you can gzip it or zip it up any other way you like to reduce the size. You will get a response just like a regular insertion or update response that is, again, formatted in the same format it was sent and with errors or successes on an individual basis for each product. So a perk of this is that instead of sending 100 requests for 100 items, you can just send one request, and you can save on your request volume. So this next great implementation feature of the Content API, I want to give some background for before I talk. So when we added this, we were pending a change to the feed specification. Many of you in here may already know about that. So on September 22nd, we changed the feed specification to allow for a better experience for the users through product search. And so certain things that were being sent through the Content API were valid before September 22nd, but were going to become invalid after September 22nd. So we wanted to give you a way to be warned ahead of time. So the warnings flag is a simple flag you can you can append to the end of a URL where you're sending a request to make an insert or an update or any state changing operation, any operation that will change your inventory. And when you put that flag, notice it's bolded here at the end of this link, when you include that flag on the end of a request, the response not only will include success or failure, it will include warnings about particular things that may become failures, or in the case of where we're recommending an attribute but not requiring it, it will give a warning showing that recommendation. In the same vein as the warning flag, we also have a dry run flag. Dry run is a sandbox. It is literally a dry run. It allows you to send a request as if you were going to update your data, modify it in some way without actually having to insert the data, without actually having to modify anything. So you'll get the exact same response you would have gotten had you sent an actual request, except nothing will actually change. This is one step up from the interactive online demo, but it is in the same vein. It gives you a way to test out an implementation before actually having an effect on your product data in the Merchant Center. One other great thing, a great usage of an API in general, but particular here to merchants and retailers, if you have a company enterprise resource planning system, an ERP system, and every time a product gets added or inserted or changed, you can actually programmatically react to those actions on your ERP and make a call to the Content API for shopping to make a similar change to your inventory in the Google Merchant Center. So that way, you can keep your own inventory system up to date with our inventory system. So I hope you like what you heard today. If you're interested in getting going, We have an active online community. It's a Google group. If you just search for Content API for shopping in Google Groups, you'll see it. Here's a link to it as well. I myself read the forum, and many of our engineers also keep up on the forum. The answers are always searchable, so if someone before you has already had the same question, you'll be able to search and find what the answer was and hopefully update your own implementation to react to that. If you are interested in more dedicated support, please contact your account manager. We do have some other options. And finally, some documentation that I myself maintain and am very serious about keeping up to date and keeping you guys as informed as possible can be found at code.google.com/apis/shopping/content. Again, you don't have to memorize this URL. If you just go to Google and search Content API for shopping, it's the first link. It's the first result. Finally, if you want to give feedback beyond the Q&A, you can join me in just a week for an office hour in a Google Plus Hangout on November 3rd. I can provide some more information after the fact for people as well. Also, if you'd like to give feedback directly about this webinar, we have a link. So you can just follow that short link, goo.gl/7pjfa, and it'll allow you to give feedback about today's webinar. If anybody has any other questions, please ask away.